Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to my channel. Today's lesson is going to be about predicted paper 2 for biopsych. I've done a video previously already for the approaches section. I'm a private tutor for psychology for UK AQA and International Oxford AQA curriculums, both GCSE and A levels. So if you're interested in scheduling your private classes with me, I've left my contact in the description box and pinned comment below. I don't want to be repetitive, so I won't go over the whole introduction of what we are doing in these lessons and how you're to approach them. All that you can see in the previous video. Only one thing I would like to emphasize on again is these are, of course, not guaranteed papers, otherwise, they wouldn't be called predicted. So just take them for good practice. Okay, let's look at the first predicted question for biopsych. With reference to the sleep-wake cycle, distinguish between endogenous pacemakers and exogenous Z-gibbers. Okay, so first let's note the key things about this question so that we don't make mistakes. It's a distinguish command term which is completely AO1. So it's AO1 for 4 marks. Also, not to miss out on something very important, the sleep wake cycle has been mentioned. So, of course, we have also learned about pacemakers and Zeitgebers for, say, infradian rhythms or ultradian rhythms, but here specifically the circadian rhythm of sleep wake cycle. So, we must not, like some students don't read properly, they read in a haste and then they start giving examples of, say, pheromones or uh, some other pacemaker or Z-gibber. So just make sure you stick to the one which has been asked in the question. Finally, it's worth 4 marks. So definitely you have to aim for 4 points, not 4 sentences per se. Like students believe 4 points means 4 sentences. No, 4 points. So as I write, I will keep showing you what counts for a point. Of course, you will be defining endogenous Z-gibbers and pacemakers and exogenous Z-gibbers because that is what they're asking you for, a distinction between the two. But after all, it's distinction. So you must use comparative wording. You must, like instead of in isolation, defining each concept, draw a direct comparison between the two. Take a feature, on the same feature, compare the two. Same thing for the next point. A feature and on the same, you're comparing the two. So exactly what language to use for that and all, I'll demonstrate in my answer. So I'll just note the answer and then I'll be able to explain to you more clearly. I'll be making points again. I'm not writing complete answers in these videos, but when you write, you have to write in paragraphs and essays. So if you need to see how to write complete answers, those type of videos are also available on my channel. So you could just look at them. Okay, endogenous pacemakers are internal regulators, the body's own innate regulators of the body. Whereas exogenous caregivers are situational or environmental external regulators of biological rhythms. So how you draw direct comparison is by contrasting on the same feature, internal versus external. Where are they coming from? The source. That is what we are directly comparing on. Instead of just providing like a rote learned definition of each separately, in the same sentence you need to draw a distinction between the two. When this is being marked in the paper, this definition definitely which you're giving, you get a mark for that, and this definition you get a second mark for this. So you're comparing in the same sentence, but you're giving 2 points, one about this and one about that. So it counts as 2 points and you get 2 marks for it. Of course, we must compare on the sleep wake cycle. So the best thing is to give an example of each for the sleep wake. When it comes to sleep wake, we know it is the suprachiasmatic nucleus which regulates as an endogenous Z-gibber, pacemaker. Of course, if you want to add anything like it's a circadian rhythm or it lasts for, it repeats in a 24-hour period, you can do all of that. Not essential, so I'm not adding, but you can add anything of that type. And when it comes to exogenous Z gibbers, it's sunlight. So again, you can see direct contrasts, just naming like which is the internal regulator and which is the external regulator for the same, for the sleep wake cycle. So contrast, distinction, like they say distinguish, always has to be drawn on the same parameter for both. In the same point, you get 1 mark for each side. But that makes for a good answer, and that's what differentiates it from a simple outline or describe type of an answer. So third mark for saying SCM, and fourth mark for pointing out about sunlight. Okay, let's look at the next question. Looking at it only, scenario based, something is mentioned, so it's AO2. Paul does not like roller coasters. His mouth goes dry, his heart beats fast, and he sweats in the queue while waiting for the ride. With reference to the fight or flight response, explain why his body acts this way. As I've discussed in some of my previous videos, when it comes to these AO2 type of questions, ideally, entirely like every point of yours, 4 marks, 4 points, should refer to the situation given, and any definitions you're giving should relate with what is happening in the situation. If not, even if you treat it as say AO1 is 2 marks and AO2 is 2 marks, so first you give some general definitions and then link it, that is also fine. Just make sure in the end you're having like 4 points. When it comes to fight or flight, there is a lot that can be said. So you need to, for these type of answers where there's lot of content and you need to bring it down to 4 points, I strongly recommend you decide on your points before writing. Do not get confused while writing, while putting down the final answer, going back and forth between what is important, what is not. Very quick. In your mind, really just jot down 4 points that you would be writing about and then write on them. When it comes to the fight or flight, there are certain symptoms which I emphasized on in the most in this situation. So definitely I will be talking about those symptoms. But how those symptoms are brought about in the first place, I would like to begin from there, like begin from the beginning. So we know it's the hypothalamus that detects a threat in the environment. So my first point will begin with hypothalamus. I would like to start linking it to Paul from the very first. So I would say hypothalamus has detected the threat of being on a roller coaster because, as we know, can be dangerous potentially. Then the hypothalamus commands the pituitary gland to take charge of the adrenal glands. So again, relating it to Paul in his case, his hypothalamus is giving that message to the pituitary, which in turn is commanding the adrenal medulla to release adrenaline. And then it is because of the surge of adrenaline that the sympathetic nervous system is becoming activated, and thereby these symptoms, again relating to a situation, dry mouth, fast heartbeat, and all are coming into play. So I've just decided, okay, these are going to be my points. Now I'm going to write the answer. Also, one more important thing that I forgot to point out earlier, it's a why question. Again, many students just gloss over these things because they're in a haste. So they become more descriptive in approach that, mouth is becoming dry. That is because, say, digestion is not required at that time and all. All that is correct, but it's not relevant. The question is, why is that happening? Not how is it happening or describe the process that is taking place in the body. So when they say why, they want to know exactly the mechanisms behind all the responses. So it has to be related to the HPA axis. Okay, so quickly to jot down the points. Hypothalamus detects threat in the roller coaster ride. Of course, if I was writing fully in a paragraph, I would write Paul's hypothalamus that way. Signals. So I would say Paul's hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland. Make sure to keep engaging with the stem. Keep it relevant to the situation given. So signals the pituitary gland to activate the adrenal medulla. That in turn, the adrenal medulla releases adrenaline, which causes symptoms like dry mouth, heartbeat. These I'm taking from the situation directly. By activating the sympathetic nervous system that arouses the body. So, how you earn your marks in this type of answer is 1 mark for seeing the role of the hypothalamus, like why all this is happening, because first the hypothalamus comes into action. Second, it's the pituitary which is taking it further. Third, the adrenal and adrenal line. And fourth, to speak about the nervous system. Okay, so this is the answer for this. Then we have what I would say easy 3 marks. Which of the following areas of the brain is being defined in each of the examples below? Choose one area of the brain that matches each function. Use each letter once only. Really simple to answer this, because when it comes to localization, we do definitely memorize which part of the brain is responsible for which function. So I'm sure you have learned this one properly and you'll be able to write. Okay, so nothing much to discuss in this. Typical MCQ. Directly we can just do the answers. You could pause the video, write your answers, and then resume and check whether you're getting the same answers like me. Broca's area, we know it is for speech production, so I would say A1. Motor area is for none of what is given here. Somatosensory area is for touch, so they have mentioned something like processing inputs from touch. C3. Finally, Wernicke's area is responsible for comprehension of language, so that's 2. Okay, so just for memorizing the brain areas, which sometimes students feel lazy about doing, or they feel like, why should we do that? But it can earn you a lot of marks in the paper. So I hope that is motivation enough for you to learn that section properly. Next is explain what the function of a neuron is. As you know, in biopsych, these sections like structure of neuron, function of neuron, structure of nervous system, they are all AO1. There's no AO3 component to them at all. So you can expect these type of questions. Previously there have been like 4 and 6 markers, so this time we're expecting a little less from this section. Key thing here, of course, it is AO1. Like I said, there is no AO3, and very hard to give AO2 also. I'm not saying they can't give, but to develop scenarios around neuronal structures and functions is quite tricky. So mostly they don't do that. So AO1 for 2 marks. Function, that's the only thing I can say. Like, focus on the fact that they've asked for function and not for structure, because inevitably some students will talk about dendrites, axons, myelin sheath. That is within structure. They want you to say what the neuron does, how it works. Functioning always means working. Okay, so make sure your answer is about that. As we know, the nervous system is the sensory motor system of the body functionally. Like technically or structurally, it's the nervous system, but functionally, it is sensory motor. So its basic unit, the neuron, is also going to be working towards that end only, sending and receiving messages between the brain and spinal cord and rest of the body. And of course, we must emphasize on the fact that electrochemical messages are transmitted throughout the nervous system. That's all what we need to talk about here. After all, it's only for 2 marks. Make sure you use good terminology. when it comes to, even if it's a 2 marker or 4 marker. Of course, in the mark scheme, they emphasize the most on terminology in essays, but that does not mean that when it comes to the shorter answers, you don't use good terminology. So do make use of words like transmission, electrochemical, brain, spinal cord, so that you can score well. Don't write very casually. Okay. So the function of a neuron is to transmit messages between brain and spinal cord and rest of the body. And this transmission is done through electrochemical messages. So within themselves, neurons conduct electricity, nerve impulses to be able to communicate from their cell body till the end of the axon. And between neurons, they exchange chemical signals. Why I'm explaining this is because some students are not very clear on this point, so then they wonder it's electro or it's chemical. They're on one side and they can't understand why the term electrochemical is being used. Okay, the next question is explain the process of synaptic transmission. Again, this is one of those questions which is purely AO1, it's coming from that section. Not only that, it's one of those questions where you've been restricted to 3 marks, meaning that you cannot give more. I know, again, you know a lot about synaptic transmission. You could even write something worth 6 marks, 2-3 paragraphs on it. But here you have to make sure you restrict yourself to 3 key points. So again, the same advice which I gave earlier. Jot down your 3 points before actually writing the answer, so that you don't make a mess when you're writing. If they want very basic, like just for 3 marks, of course, the most important thing is where the message is coming from, where it is coming into, and where it is being received. 3 points. So in synaptic transmission, it's the presynaptic axon that releases the chemical message. It is the synaptic cleft where that message, that neurotransmitter is received. And then it is further absorbed by the postsynaptic receptor from that synaptic cleft. This much, if I give, is sufficient for 3 marks. I'll tell you about other possible points. You could talk about the vesicles which release neurotransmitter upon receiving the nerve impulse. You could talk about uh, the lock and key principle, that one neurotransmitter will fit into only one type of receptor. So of course there are lots of possible points and they will credit you for all those points for this type of an answer. It's just that I feel if you talk about the main processes, those are little secondary, like they're more in depth. It's better to keep your focus on the main process, like as you can explain in the shortest way possible, giving a summary of the process. So my 3 points would be presynaptic axon releases neurotransmitter. It is released into the synaptic cleft and then it is received by the postsynaptic dendrite. So my points would be as simple as that. Again, I would say this is an easy 3 marks in the paper. Like if you've done your neurons, synaptic transmission and localization AO1 part, wrote, learned it, it's really easy to score in biopsych. Okay. Now coming to describe and evaluate any 2 ways of investigating the brain. Again, a simple question. It is expected this year that an essay would be coming from ways of investigating the brain. There are, as far as I remember, 4 ways of investigating, 4 brain scanning techniques or a brain analysis technique given in the textbook, in the syllabus. fMRI, postmortem, EEG, ERP. If there is any other, I'm not remembering immediately. Now, out of these, they have explicitly told you to give two ways. Despite this, students will ask me, what if we give only one? What if we give more than two? Then they phrase the question that way. Then they'll tell you two or more than two, for example. Yeah, they're not telling you that. When they're saying two, they mean exactly two. So, first, in your mind, finalize which are the two which you know the best and you can give. If you're thinking about how much description and evaluation is worth, you want to decide on that basis. Description AO1 is worth 3 marks because it's an 8 marker, and evaluation AO3 is worth 5 marks. So, roughly, you can think of it as for AO1, you will have to give 2 points on each technique that you select. After all, it's worth only 3 marks. And for AO3 evaluation, 2 evaluation points. I strongly recommend one from one technique, one from the other technique to maintain a good balance in the answer rather than giving both evaluation points from the same technique. Okay, very quickly before I select two, just a run through on all the four. If you're talking about fMRI, you would have to talk about blood flow oxygenation principle, how that enables functional scanning of the brain. So make sure you know about that, then only take up fMRI. If you're talking about post-mortem, you would have to explain how post-death the brain is physically removed and microscopically studied. So again, if you can talk about that, select post-mortem. Means make sure you know what these terms indicate, that you use these terms, because you know you get marks for good terminology. EEG, electroencephalography, if you're talking about that, you will have to like explain electrodes and output in the form of brain waves. So make sure you can discuss that. Finally, if you're taking event related potential, ERP, many students call it electric related potential. So first of all, make sure you know the correct name. Again, if you talk about ERP, electrodes, and more importantly, uh, the detection of minute changes in brain activity, you'll be able to discuss that. So these are the expectations from the four techniques. So just think about which you can explain well, which principles you can explain well out of these, then only select those. Also, one thing I have noticed personally when it comes to checking students' work, when it comes to ways of investigating the brain, the principles on which these techniques work is the most important thing in the syllabus. For example, fMRI working on blood oxygenation principle. Many students are led astray and they start discussing superficial things like the person has to lie in a tunnel like scanner. No doubt that is a part of fMRI, but that's not the main thing to be discussed. Main is how is it working, how is it showing activity in the brain. So in their answer, there is no mention of it being a functional technique, of it working on the oxygenation principle. Rather, there is discussion about the person lying in the scanner. It has been used in memory tasks. This part of the brain does this work, and then it goes all over the place. Make sure you remain focused on the principle of working of the technique of investigation. Especially, I can't emphasize it enough, when AO1 is worth only 3 marks, how you justify those 3 marks is by giving the most important points. It's not like a 6 marker where you give, you know, practically any or every detail. So when that's the skill you need to know. When it comes to description AO1, when it's worth different marks, sometimes 3, sometimes 6. When it's worth lesser marks, your points need to be all the more focused and the most relevant points need to be brought about. So I hope I'm able to convey that message to you, and so make sure that you implement that in this answer. First, let me jot down the AO1 points and then we discuss AO3. I would like to take fMRI. It's very popular with students, and of course, it is something psychology students should know well about. I think it's a very important technique. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, one way is fMRI. When you're writing, signpost it. Begin with one way of investigating the brain is fMRI, which is a functional scan of the brain, shows working of the brain or activity of brain areas, works on blood oxygen principle. You need to outline that also in a line, like you can't just say with the bold principle. You need to explain what it means, not like just the full form, that blood oxygen level dependent scanning, rather what it does. So the bold principle, which detects increased oxygen being drawn by active areas in the brain. And not compulsory, but just to show the importance of the technique in one line besides the principle. This is optional if you want to mention. Has been used in many studies in psychology to investigate areas active for cognitive processing. For example, frontal lobe activation for planning and decision making. What I'm not writing about here is, like I told you, scanner, lying in the scanner, being in a tunnel. Potential ethical issues should not come at all. Many students, when they think about fMRI, the only thing that comes to their mind is possible physical or psychological harm. That's evaluative. So anyways, it should not be coming in a description section. And again, it's something secondary, not the main thing to be discussed. So I've just given principle and importance. Also, what I'm not discussing is contrasting it with MRI, uh, like how that is structural and this is functional. All those things can be considered secondary when it's worth only 3 marks, and this fMRI roughly is worth 1 or 2 marks by itself. So there's no need to go into those things. Focus should be here. Okay, second way I would like to give is EEG. That is a we can call it, like, it's not scanning, it's temporal detection of neuronal activity. Basically shows which neurons are active in the brain, which are generating nerve impulses. So there are electrodes that detect neuronal activity and transmit them onto that outputs a monitor that outputs the activity as brain waves, and then the frequency and amplitude of the waves can be assessed for uh, gauging, like, degree of arousal in different brain areas. So again, this is the principle of how it works. Again, what I'm not writing about it, how the electrodes are pasted onto the scalp, or it is again ethical things, like people could get entangled in the wires because many times they have to sleep when they are connected to the EEG, or for the researchers it can be difficult to constantly monitor, or sometimes EEG can have a sound output component also besides a visual component. Those things are secondary. These are the main things. I've given the principle of working. Again, optional if you want to give the importance of this technique. So used in many studies in psychology. Like, one type of studies that come to my mind are the consumer type of studies, where degree of frustration upon, say, watching advertisements is detected by using the EEG, but more prominent example, classic use of EEG has been in sleep, detection of stages of sleep, ultradian rhythms. So I would like to give that as an example. So to investigate stages of sleep and dreaming, for example, association between REM and dreaming. So I'm sure you've come across the studies by, say, Aserinsky and Kleitman or Dement and Kleitman, and you have seen this application of EEG. When you're writing, it has to be in paragraph. Keep signposting. One way is this, second way is this. Ideally, break it into two paragraphs, so at least only AO1 given one paragraph, AO3 keep in separate paragraphs. If you want to know more about organizing your answer well, as I've mentioned previously in some videos, I've actually written down complete answers and explained organization as I have written those answers. You can visit those videos. Also, what was coming to my mind was that, not really use good terminology or give full forms of whatever you're writing, because I'm writing in short. But when you're writing, make sure to write at least once the full name of the technique, like functional magnetic resonance imaging or electroencephalography. Okay. Now coming to the AO3 part. See, one thing is definitely, as we learn as a principle only, that we should give some study. Like, first thing which comes to mind is we are writing AO3. We should begin with some study support. So of course we can talk about some study which has made use of the fMRI or the EEG, and how that study has really contributed to psychology. And it is because of the fMRI technique that we've been able to discover such good findings in the field. How it works here is, when we give those studies, we show that it's actually been important to research in psychology, that particular method. So definitely those studies stand as strengths. So for fMRI, if I have to think of immediately, I think many studies are there in evaluation in the textbook. For example, I can remember in memory, I won't be able to tell you the researchers' names, but I'm sure you remember. Memory, there are studies where fMRI has been used when people are using, you know, different types of long-term memory. Might be Tulving's study or some replication, modern replication. I don't remember which one it was, but to locate in the frontal lobe precisely where is semantic memory and where is episodic memory. So giving participants tasks like remembering events from their life or general knowledge, and then seeing which part is active. So I remember those studies are there for fMRI. And then there are studies throughout the book. Like, I'm sure in psychopathology also it is there, and schizophrenia also it is there. And examples can be from anywhere, from your year 1 or year 2 curriculum. When it comes to EEG, Aserinsky and Kleitman in this chapter itself, biopsych, biological rhythm section, sleep wake, or Dement and Kleitman, EEG has been used. Definitely, just something was coming to mind. Which where other place I have seen EEG? Maybe in the relationships option. Not very sure. Or relationships when it comes to frustration when partners are conflicting. Some study was there of how EEG was used to see which areas of the brain are contributing to that. So definitely you can give those type of studies here, but I would not like to take studies for this answer, because more than showing how helpful these techniques have been in studies, I would like to bring about of these techniques only some strengths and weaknesses. So I'd like to give a strength of fMRI and then a counter to it, and then a weakness of EEG. Sorry, a strength of EEG and a counter to it. That is my preference, just a matter of preference. You could write the other way also. It's not like one evaluation system is better than the other. It's about how you write it. Okay. So again, just brainstorm some points before writing. General points, non-study type. When it comes to fMRI, the strengths that we have seen are, it shows functional activity of the brain. Most techniques show only the structures of the brain, so definitely an advantage. Biggest advantage is the HD resolution output of the images. Non-invasiveness, especially if we compare with PET technology. Safer, of course, even PET is very safe, but not even minimal risk is involved of invasion when it comes to fMRI. When it comes to weaknesses of the fMRI, there's that lag, which is the major weakness. There is a minute lag in displaying the output compared to when the activity is actually occurring in the brain. Besides, of course, the unsuitability of the technique for two reasons: practical unsuitability. One is not being able to assess people who have claustrophobia. That goes in ethical territory also, but it won't be used unethically. So, more of it's a practical issue. People having claustrophobia, many people will not be able to undergo this technique, and then it relates to representativeness of samples becoming poor. Also unsuitability because of the expense of the technique, very expensive, available only in large hospitals, very difficult for researchers to access. Those are right now the points coming to my mind. I'm sure there are more, but immediately, like, these are the most prominent ones which come to mind. EEG, biggest strength is immediate output. Temporal, as we saw, immediate in time. As brain activity takes place, it is outputted onto the computer. So temporal validity is very high. So not temporal validity, temporal measurement is very high. Of course, another strength is a very inexpensive techniques and expensive, and with time adapted to being very mobile and flexible. Like earlier, it was that the person has to be fixed in one place for EG assessment to be done, but today, even as people are working around, it can be done. When people are moving about also, even in their workplaces, like they are doing something, a task. So very naturalistic type of studies can be done today with the EEG. And of course, this one is also pretty ethical. In fact, one of the most ethical ones, non-invasive completely. And no injections at all required. Like if I compare with PET, and if I compare with fMRI, in fact, not even the minimal of having to put the person into a scanner, which could trigger claustrophobia, even that much of minimal distress risk is not there in this technique. It keeps the person totally free in the open, like even if they're in the laboratory, they are not restricted or confined in any way. Highly ethical technique. In the limitations, the biggest limitation is not bringing about an image output of the brain, not showing the brain visibly, just showing brain waves, so inability to see the brain directly. So I would call it indirect observation. And of course, limited usage, which is a criticism we see in ERP also, in case you're taking that. Going up to the single electrode level is being made possible in modern times, but traditionally it has not been possible. The activity of only groups of neurons can be assessed at a time, which makes it a little crude technique. If you want to look at the working of one particular neuron, single potentiation, that requires some added technology. It's not possible with traditional EEG or ERP. Also, limited usage in the sense that only the areas of the brain immediately below the scalp, that is chiefly the cortex, can be assessed, whereas subcortical areas like the hypothalamus, limbic system, and all, which are very, very important to psychology, are very difficult to assess using the EEG. And of course, there are applications that you can talk about in both. If you, even if you don't want to give the specific studies, you could talk about in fMRI application is for visually seeing which area of the brain is active while performing a particular task, and EEG is to see arousal and sleepiness as a task is being performed. One thing which comes to my mind looking at all this is, though the question does not require it at all, like it's not a contrast or a comparison type of question, but if you want, you can draw a comparison between fMRI and EEG. For example, you could say a strength of fMRI is it outputs high resolution images of the brain, whereas the EEG does not output any image of the brain. It only outputs activity in the form of waves. So, like, this is a strength here, but a weakness there. A strength in fMRI, but a weakness in EEG. But when it comes to fMRI, a weakness is the time lag, that it does not immediately produce output as brain activity occurs, which is a strength in the case of EEG, immediate display of output in real time of how the brain is working. So minute fluctuations in the brain which might be missed by the fMRI will not be missed by the EEG. So that way, you can compare both the methods. It's not required, like I've said, they're not asked to distinguish two methods. So I'm taking them separately. But if you want, you can take that approach, and it's definitely good. Shows a good level of critical thinking. Okay, so my points for strengths and weaknesses. I'll begin with the strength of fMRI. As I mentioned previously, high resolution output of the brain. And I just forgot I should write in the Peel format. So this is going to be my point. The elaboration of this is that it can produce magnified or detailed images of even small tiny parts of the brain. We could give an example here. For example, parts as tiny as, say, the insula, how that is working, or those small limbic structures like amygdala, how it is working during fear. Amygdala is like a very tiny structure of the brain, but how it is working with section of the amygdala is working even that much we're able to see with the help of fMRI. So why this is a strength, like to explain why it is a strength, because that can enable fine localization in the brain, precise localization, to see exactly which areas contribute to which behaviors. And of course, if you want to take this one step further, you can link it to some sort of intervention or treatment. Like once we know which exact area is playing a role, that can be targeted for intervention. So, say for example, if it's one section, say right amygdala, which is contributing to fear response. So tomorrow, say we want to prepare a treatment of phobia, drug treatment. We can prepare some drug treatment or surgery which would target that particular area of the amygdala. Link wise, definitely increases the usefulness or application of the technique. Very, very useful and very valid technique. It's very accurate in the brain areas that it is showing to be responsible for some behavior. To give a counterpoint, like to make it a Peel C type of a point. However, the time lag which I have mentioned, that I will take as a counterpoint. There is a delay, slight delay of a few seconds or milliseconds in producing output once brain activity has occurred. So this could result in could result in non-detection of some minute fluctuations in brain activity. Okay, similarly, I'll write a Peel C type of point for the EEG. But before I proceed to EEG, just remembered one thing, the first point which is there, that it produces like detailed images of the brain. If you want to make it even more effective, just see how much your time and word count permits. You could compare it to the PET, which just generates functional output, in the sense just blurred or broad colored areas of the brain which are active but not really showing the structures, whereas fMRI shows both the structures and their activity. So that gives it a real benefit over cruder techniques like the PET. So if you want to explain something like that, like talk a little about PET or maybe in one sentence, that can also make for an effective point. Okay, coming to a similar point for EEG. A strength of EEG is real time output, like I had mentioned before. What we mean by that is, immediately as activity occurs in the brain, waves are produced continuously on the monitor. An example of this could be, let's say someone's in REM sleep, and there is a, I think even a better example than this, more prominent one could be, say someone's in stage 2 of light sleep, and there are spindles taking place occasionally, very quick bursts of activity in the brain. Even that is detected immediately by the EEG, means that's how precise it is in outputting in real time. Now, explanation of why this is a strength. The whole advantage of real time scanning is enabling precise cause effect, if we can call that, like between brain activity and behavior. Of course, it is correlational, it's not literally cause effect, but being able to establish perfectly with this particular activity in the brain times exactly with this particular behavior that the individual does, which is difficult to determine when there is a lag between the activity occurring and the behavior being done. So we could just say this enables a precise detection of correspondence between, I'm avoiding using the term cause effect. And so the link here is, this definitely increases the accuracy validity of the technique. You could also say it makes it superior to other techniques like fMRI when it comes to real time correspondence detection. As a counter to this, it's almost like what we've written in fMRI is getting reversed here. We can't see the images of the brain. So that means, though we can know which area is active at what time, we cannot really see the activity in that area. And as I mentioned before, that makes it like a broad detection of activity in the brain and not as precise as we could be able to visibly see. So precise assessment, visual assessment of specific brain areas active during a behavior, not possible to detect. Okay, so that would be my 8 marker for 2 ways of investigating the brain. Of course, you could have something related to postmortem, and there you could detect how it's become an outdated technique, and you need to wait for the person to expire, and only after that, you can assess the brain. By the time there can be qualitative changes in the brain, However, the good thing about it is that it has classic value. At one time, it was the only technique possible. Or alternative, and a lot of it has been re-verified in research. Like whatever Broca said, for example, or Wernicke said, by doing post-mortem analysis, all of that is holding ground even when we are doing superior brain scanning assessment of the same areas today. If you're taking ERP, alternatively, your evaluation points could be around how it is much more superior to uh, EEG, because it can bring about, activity of the brain in response to a particular task that a person is performing. Unlike EEG, which just measures like natural activity occurring in the brain. So it can really show those minor negative or positive potentials in the brain in response to a given task. However, the weakness is, since to determine like which negative or positive potentiation is taking place, we have to average across hundreds or even thousands of trials of the same task, same behavior, to get that, one activity that's taking place. It's very tedious, time consuming, very taxing on participants and researchers alike to use ERP. So those are some of the points that could be taken for evaluation coming to my mind. Okay, so that is what we are expecting for biopsych, and that is my suggestion on how you should answer the paper if these type of questions come. I have covered two sections of paper two. I haven't taken paper one because, firstly, I felt time is very short. I'm quite late in making these videos, and students, like even my own students, typically keep telling me to practice paper two and three as against paper one. So they just find it simpler. So I've done that. I have covered paper two, prediction, entirely. When it comes to research methods, there's nothing to predict, because anything and everything comes in every year of assessment. So whether it's sampling technique, ethics, with statistical tests you should use, so it's just a matter of solving past papers. There's no point even trying to predict what would come in research methods. It's not content oriented, it's totally AO2, application oriented. So for that, that's the only section left. I'm not going to be doing it in the predicted series. Please just keep solving past papers. I think very recently I had done one research method section for the June 2024 paper that had come for A levels. So please, follow that video if you want practice on research methods. My videos generally to do with A levels, but equally effective for AS students only, those taking psychology only at AS. One or two sections here and there, or one or two questions in research methods might not be applicable to your content, but the rest of it you find it useful. So my intention is in the next class to move towards section C. Paper 3, not section C. And in that, I will be covering issues and debates, cognition and development, schizophrenia. That is my intention. I know there are lots of options, aggression, relationships, and no doubt my students, like from different schools, have taken different options. The private candidates, home learners, they have had some very peculiar choices which I've not taken in school. But why I am finalizing on cognition and development and schizophrenia is my UAE students. Like I deal mostly with UK and UAE students. In the UAE schools, mostly I have seen that these two are definitely taken, cognition and development and schizophrenia. Third, mostly it's forensics that's taken, but that can vary a little. These two I've definitely found students taking. So that's why I'm taking up these two. If you would like me to do any other section also, say you want me to do forensics, that's, like I told you, another popular one chosen by schools. My private candidates, they like to do gender, aggression. So if you want me to do any of those or any other, like, I just feel relationships is something I don't see students selecting, or eating behaviors, but they are also such good topics. So if you want me to do any of that, you definitely let me know. I am interested in doing those. It's just that I'm not doing them because they are not very popular choices. So you can leave any such suggestions in the comments box below what you want me to do. I have predictions for all the sections, so I can take up any of those. You want me to do past papers for any particular option, or you have any feedback on this video, or any doubts about the type of answers I've given, anything like that, you can ask me in the comments box below. Please don't contact me for tuition in the comments box, and please don't use my personal number to talk about the videos. Please put your queries in the right channels, then only I will be able to answer them. So thank you so much for watching this video, and next time it's going to be paper 3. So I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.